consultant, recovering tech professional, worked in online advertising for about 15 years, including Pinterest and a bunch of other ad tech startups. I now do the fractional thing, helping with marketing and go to market. I also help professionals build flexible, independent careers. So I'm kind of building a portfolio career, or portfolio life is something that I talk about online as well. I've been doing this for a few years. I also brought along my friend Vikash, who is just starting out in his fractional journey. We went to college together. We were in the same fraternity. We're not going to be talking about fraternity stuff today. He recently made the leap, as I said. He landed his first few clients, and he's kind of actively figuring things out as we go along. And he and I have been texting for the past couple months quite a bit more about different random questions. How do I set up an LLC? What tax structure should I use? Like, all the things. And so we can go into those sorts of tactical things if we want to. Overall, we have a 45-minute call. So our agenda for the next 45 minutes or so is I really want this to be interactive, practical, no fluff, if possible. And so we want to kind of go through some common myths and dispel some of those and talk about the realities of fractional work. I want to talk about the kind of like your biggest questions and fears with an open Q&A to tackle your concerns live. I want to give some insight on is this right for you? This was the name of it, right? So kind of a gut check to see if this path fits your life. I'll give some kind of criteria about that. And we'll end with kind of a final Q&A and wrap up, but it can be interactive the whole time, to be honest. It's not a webinar. It's a conversation. It's pretty small. There's not that many of us here. And so please feel free to drop questions in the chat anytime or raise your hand to jump in. And we'll be asking for your input along the way. So please stay engaged if you can. Don't be shy. So there we go. Any questions before we get started?
Yeah, I have one real quick.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll probably answer it during the presentation, but is fractional work, so say you want to change industries, is fractional work often is it a good way to get your feet wet in another industry, see what it's like before fully committing to a full-time job in it?
I think that depends on your function. I would say it can be, but it's not necessarily. It's easier to kind of make the leap from full-time to fractional with the same industry, the same function, because there's already a lot changing. But you can, if the function that you do doesn't require kind of a ton of industry or domain expertise, and the projects that you're doing don't require that, then you can definitely do that, right? So if you're a generalist in terms of marketing or ad buying, for example, right? And you can kind of do ad buying and growth marketing across industries. But for some things like maybe product marketing, that doesn't work as well because it's kind of the main thing that you're selling is domain expertise. What do you think, Vikash? Anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big piece of what you're going to hear today is about, your network is going to help you feed the fractional work that you get and the projects that you get. So if you're jumping to a new industry, you got a great network there. Great, it's probably gonna be okay. But I think most of your network is probably and most of the network that's willing to trust you as a consultant or as an independent person, and has right in your. So that's tough. I think, I think it could work depending just on what the shift is. But I think to Sean's point, it feels like it's going to be probably the less common way. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah. Is that a good starting point for you, George? Thumbs up?
Yes.
All right, great. Let's I'm going to start with a quick poll. 4 options on where you are, and go ahead and just vote in the chat as well. I just sent it through in the chat, and I'll say it live as well. So number 1, you're thinking about fractional work, but you haven't started. Number 2, you just started less than 6 months in. Number 3, you're actively working as a fractional consultant. Number 4, you're considering returning to full-time work. So you're doing it, but you are kind of maybe on the way out or thinking about being on the way out. And just answer whichever one feels the closest. If it's in between, just choose one. All right, so I'm seeing 1, 2, 1, 4, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. So definitely the most ones. Thinking about it, but haven't started. A few 2s as well. All right. Great. So that'll help us tailor the conversation. That was kind of what I was thinking, honestly, going in, given the topic, right? Like, is it right for you, right? It's kind of like top of the funnel. I'm a marketer, right? Top of the funnel. People who don't necessarily haven't been doing it for that long. So yeah, we'll keep most of the kind of beginning stuff. Trevor, I'm curious to get maybe some of your perspective as the only 4 that I saw. As we go along, you may have some more experience than some others on this call, so that could be cool. Or maybe you have tried it but not. Do you want to give any more insight on that one, Trevor?
Yeah, I've done consulting in the past, but not recently too much. And I guess I'm trying to return to a full-time job after having my own company, but it wasn't really fractional. So
Okay.
that's why I put 4.
Okay, got it. All right, so let's do some myth busters now. So I'm going to throw another thing in the chat that has, you're going to answer these with a true or a false. There we go. So number 1, you need a big audience or brand to land clients. Number 2, fractional work is just freelancing with a fancy name. Actually, I should have done this one at a time. Let's answer for number 1 first. You need a big audience or brand. True or false? False, false, false. False, false. All right. Yeah. What do you think, Vikash? Why don't you go first? Do you think that the crowd is right in saying it is false?
Yeah, no, I think you gotta.
Yeah.
I think it was a good softball to start, but you don't. I think, and I kind of gave it away earlier on mine, that it's about your network, right? Like your network might be very small, but if it's a good network of folks, you can get started very quickly. So I would say that's very much false.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need, right? If you're doing fractional work, it's kind of like relatively intensive for each client. And so you can't take on more than 3, probably is kind of like where most people would cap out. It depends how much time and how big the projects are, but approximately, right? And so to get 3 does not require a funnel of thousands at the top. It requires more tight connection with fewer people.
I would also say, think about sort of the soft launch phase, right? So I think if you looked at the kind of the way Sean broke out the categories, that first 6 months is like, that's where you're kind of building a brand and soft launching, right? I have a feeling that in a few months I'll create an actual name for my venture instead of just, vikashreddy.com. But right, so, feel free to go with the network that you have and build and grow.
Yeah. All right, let's do number 2. Fractional work is just freelancing with a fancy name. True or false? False. True. False. False. True. All right, more of a debate on this one. True. Anyone else want to weigh in? Anyone want to weigh in live? If not, I'll put Vikash on the spot again.
I'll weigh in
Okay.
live if you don't mind, because this is actually kind of a question I have. So I think I said false. I think of a freelancer as somebody who's really more of like filling a specific tactical function, whereas maybe I think of fractional as more of like a strategic function, meaning like more of the team. I would actually have the question of where does advisory and fractional sort of break up? Like, to me, that's a blurred line. So that's why I would say false, is I think it's more strategic than tactical.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else before we give our perspective on this? No? Okay. I can go first. I think so. Typically, freelance is all doing and not that much advising, right? Or not that much kind of like suggesting and strategy of what you want to do. It's basically like just do these things, these tasks, right? Fractional is a mix typically of strategy and tactics. So like suggesting plans, figuring out what to do, kind of the high level, as well as actually doing that. And then advising is kind of just the high level, and then somebody else is doing. That's the main way that I would think about it. There's a little bit of kind of seniority as well, that fractional tends to be more senior. So if somebody was, kind of 24 years old, they had had a job for a year and they were like, I want to be a fractional CMO, I might be like, that doesn't really fit. But if they're like, I want to do freelance instead of working for a company, and they have kind of like spent some amount of time like doing a thing, right? Whatever that thing is, then that's available to them. I think it's harder. Your network isn't as strong when you're younger, but yeah, people will probably trust you to do the thing. If you show your work, you show a portfolio of having done the thing, then you can, figure out how to get freelance work that way. What do you think, Vikash?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes the nomenclature questions, I'm like, I don't know. We're all doing things, right? I mean, I think to me, fractional work. So I think me, in the way I think about my life, I do freelance research as one of my things that I do. One of the pieces of my pie, so to speak, one of my fractions. There are a couple of other things that I do, right, that I don't know if I'm freelancing, I don't know if I'm advising. I think for me, fractional work is really the term that we're giving to the folks who are putting together multiple different, and I think it's funding streams is really the critical, right? Because I think about this a lot too. I sort of feel like I was doing fractional work in my previous job, right? I had like 4 projects and I would divide my time, and they were for maybe different purposes or different publications or whatever, but it was a very fraction driven, and I would talk to my supervisor about, yeah, I'm about 10 to 15% of my time on like project X, right? Which is a mentality that I think is useful to me now. But I think the fractional is really just you've got multiple different, and those can be made up of different. There's advisory projects and freelancing projects.
Yeah,
and yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, so it's funny. The more time I spend working as a fractional consultant, the more I think about full time in a different way. So I think like there was this question at one point. I was like working for one company as a full-time employee, and then it turned into a DAO. I was working in Web3. I don't know how many of you guys know what DAOs are, but decentralized autonomous organization. It's like the organization behind the token, right? And so it turned into a DAO. DAOs don't have employees, and so I had to resign my role as the full-time employee of the Delaware-based C Corp startup, right, and become the fractional, or not fractional, it was still all of my time, but it was a consultant for this organization. And I had this question of like, and then eventually it fell apart. And I was like, okay, did I just like lose my job? Did I just get laid off? Or did I lose my only client? Right. And the truth was that I lost my only client because I was not an employee at that point. Okay. But also it benefited in different ways. It benefited me to have one or the other. So I convinced them to pay me a severance as if I'd been laid off. But then in terms of me wanting to diversify and move into fractional work, I was like, shoot, I shouldn't put all my eggs in one basket and only have one client that takes up all of my time, because then I'm not layoff proof, right? Then I'm not resilient. And so I should sell my services maximum of 50% of the time to one particular entity. And so that, I think, is the core of what a lot of people that do fractional work see as the main value of doing fractional work, is that they get diversity and the power dynamics change in your favor, right? If you're able to make that change and work with multiple clients. Then if a client is not treating you well, you fire them, you still have income. Yeah. All right. Number 3. So you'll make less money than a full-time job. True or false? Anyone voting yet? Adir, you're voting just to me. I don't know if that's intentional or not. Maybe. False. It depends. True. Could go either way. False. Yeah. Definitely could go. Maybe you can go first, Vikash, and then I'll go second on this one.
Yeah, right. It's I think this is probably why everybody is like, well, I'm thinking about it, but I don't know, right? It depends. I think I went this direction because I could see that, I think my sense on this is if you're thinking about this, then you probably got a small base of clients that you're like, or potential clients, you're like, I could count on X $1,000 from them, right? And that's probably, I don't know, maybe that's half of what your target is, right? So your target is probably like your salary plus fringe plus whatever your company is paying for, right? So for me, it was like salary, fringe, and they paid for all my conference travel. So that was how I set my target for the year. So you can probably think about like, oh, I've got like these 3 friends who will totally toss me some low dollar contracts, but then I'm like, oh, I've got to hustle for the rest of it. And so then it's a question of like, well, how much do you have to hustle for? Are you confident that you can get there? And I think one thing that I have definitely come to appreciate in the last, and I'm only like 2 months into this now, we tend to undervalue ourselves when we're in salaried roles. And I am getting the sense that actually there's more value to the consultant role, but you've got to hustle to put it together, and you may end up doing sort of fewer hours, and you're doing a lot of other stuff that is sort of feels unpaid, right? Like I'm writing proposals and I'm doing these other things. So
what do you mean by value less? Do you mean on in like if you were to look at it on an hourly basis, that the price
6 months ago, when I was in the position of thinking about whether or not I should go freelance, I thought I could make X dollars per hour. The rate actually is like double what I thought I was gonna bill.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so that's the main thing I would say, is that it is harder to book all of your time at the beginning. And you honestly don't necessarily want to do that because there's other things you have to set up with like paid work. And so as a result of that, and also just because the dynamics are different, you should be and you must be charging more per hour for consulting work, for fractional work, than you do for full-time work, right? So think about it as your full-time employer is getting a bulk discount because they're buying all of your time. They buy it at a cheaper rate, right? And whereas if you're working with multiple clients and you're selling them less of your time, then you have to sell it. You do sell it at a higher price, and they're used to paying that, right? They're used to paying. They think about it not usually that much on, or I should say, the right target customer doesn't think about it in terms of the hourly rate as much as they think about it in terms of the outcomes that they're able to achieve with the amount that they spend per time period that's larger than an hour. So a month, for example. They think about it as my budget is 5K a month, 10K a month, 15K a month, whatever that number is. And what do I get for that chunk of money from an outcome perspective? That's more the way the right client is thinking about it. And so if you have valuable skills and you are selling your skills in a good way, then you can definitely theoretically make more than a full-time job because the price is higher, right? But it's harder to book up everything.
I think so I'll add sort of two pieces of maybe nuance to it, right? So if we're thinking about the long term, are you going to make long term wise a year from now? Are you going to be making more than you're currently making in your salary role or less than you're currently making? A lot of variables that are going to depend on you, how much you want to go get contracts, how much you want to work, what you're billing, right? But it is possible. My goal for 2025 is that I earn more than I earned in 2024, but I work fewer hours. And I think I'm going to pull that off. It's not going to be like a massive slam dunk, but it'll be, marginally, I think I'm going to make it work, right? And so that's one thing. In the short term, the first 6 months, it kind of sucks, right? Because I think about this too as sort of everything's in a cycle that's at like operating at 30,000 feet and you're starting at zero and you got to get up there and into the cycle and it takes a few months and so you do have a bit of a loss on the front end, and so understand that you do have to in the short term it's going to be a little bit tough as you're sort of building your way into it, but you will as you sort of lay the groundwork and continue to sort of meet people and get your word out there, fill your sort of hours up.
Yeah, great. All right, last one. Fractional work equals complete time freedom. False, 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 false. This is a layup. What a layup question to end on. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Anisha's got it. Basically, it is false. You definitely have more time freedom because you decide. Like literally, there are laws that prevent, if a person in the U.S. at least, if a person is a contractor and not an employee, they cannot be told like that they have to show up at a particular time in a particular location. Nothing like that. That's illegal. Cannot do that. That is basically like a classification legal issue. So yes, you have more power and control in the dynamic because of it. But if you don't do any work, your retention is not going to be very good. And you probably won't get very many referrals. And yeah. Anything else to add?
No, I think like you say, layup. You got to do the work, but you can I can go skiing tomorrow because I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. Just don't
I don't
book
have to
any
use
calls
a
on that
vacation
day,
day,
right?
Like
Yeah. There's no vacation days, for better or for worse, right? No days where you get paid to do nothing. And also, you can take one whenever you want. Are fractional employees digital nomads? You can be a digital nomad and be a fractional employee. You can be, and you can not be a digital nomad. And yeah, no, they are not one and the same. I think of digital nomad as somebody just chooses not to have a home, and they work online. And some people, you can do that with fractional work. You can do that with full-time work if there's no requirement to be in office. I personally live in San Francisco. I'm not a nomad, right? But I do work from home.
I'm
Vikash is
presently not a
debating.
nomad, but I am looking at language programs in Mexico City, and I read recently that the government of New Zealand relaxed the rules on people who are there with visitors visas to do remote work, and so my line of work, I can check in with people by Zoom, and it's rare that I need to be in person at places. So I'm considering that, but also, I don't know.
So the answer is Vikash is highly interested in
Yeah.
in doing that.
This is a good question. How do you split your day week between customers? I don't know that I have a good answer, Adir. I mean, I think so part of this is based on the size of the project and the scope and the amount they're paying, right? Like, I don't want to spend like hundreds of hours on something that's only a few grand. So that's part of it. I think, I do try to work block pretty heavily and think about sort of here's what I need to put down for a client for this amount. But that's also a personal question, and it's one that I struggled with. And I mentioned earlier in the salaried job where I had multiple projects, was like, oh, do I just want to go hard with this one paper for this week, or do I want to like do mornings with this paper and afternoons on the other stuff? And so I think it's just making sure you're clear on sort of what's on your agenda, how much of your time do you think it should be taking, and then assigning time to it. I think for me, time blocking and work blocking like that has become more important since I became fractional, right? Monitoring the fractions, so to speak. Um, so I think that's how I do it. I think for me too, before I toss it back to Sean, I'll say I don't have as much sort of interaction daily or weekly with my clients. Like I tend to get a project, a research project, and then I'm doing it, and then we'll check back in later. So I can slot it where I need to, and I don't need to sort of think about it that way.
Yeah, I'll answer the same question. I would say I try to follow my energy and my curiosity as much as possible. So this is, I would say, an idea that I'm trying across my life, not just in work, but I would say it's most applicable to work, is that I try to like work on things that I feel like working on at the time that I am thinking about them and feel like doing them. And I don't have a structure of like I do this day a week, but I do take into account the deadlines, right? So even if I don't feel like working on it, if it's due tomorrow, I'm going to find some time to do it before it's due, right? So I still set deadlines, I still set expectations, but as much as possible, I do like to work when I'm kind of inspired. And I think the more your work is kind of like creative work, the more important it is that you sort of like hone that skill. And the work that I do is not like super creative. It's like, mostly product marketing, marketing strategy, things like that, but it has creative components. And so this is kind of like driven by a desire, as well as I think that I produce slightly better work if I do it that way. All right, so let's move on to, I'm curious, I want to put you guys all in the hot seat, and I'm very curious of what is your biggest hesitation or fear that is stopping you from going fractional? And you feel free to put it in the chat or to unmute or raise your hand, any of those. We don't really need to raise our hand. It's not.
There's some interesting questions here in the chat too. I think both similar, or not similar, but in the same vein of sort of client vetting and selection. Which, Lorenzo, I think you should be thinking about potential. I don't think you would want to represent two clients in conflict. I don't know. I don't have any direct experience on that, but it's probably something that, and the vetting process, I don't know. I don't have a great answer on that because I think for me, I'm early stage and my projects are all word of mouth and within network, right? And so I know enough about, even if I don't know the people to whom I'm being referred or who are reaching out, like I know enough about them to be trustworthy of them as clients. So, I think I have right now sort of 3 signed and kind of 2 in the wings clients, and I think again all of them are either people I know or friends of friends, right? Sort of that second degree connection.
All right, and then going back to the question that I asked around the biggest hesitation or fear, George shared that it was kind of just not knowing that fractional was even a thing. And I think honestly, I think that's huge. I think there are a lot of people that really just think full time, and that's like the path, and that's like the ladder that we all think about, and that is a real thing. Lack of network, not knowing how to find fractional roles. Yeah, that's very common as well. Or you don't think, right? Vikash, what's something that maybe, did you think about that before? About, oh, do I actually have a network that would enable me to do fractional work?
I was racked with fear on this. I think,
Okay.
I was like, do I know anybody who is willing to pay me, and would they be willing to pay me enough money for me to live? I think I was convinced that, the people who were paying, because people were paying for my work, or the work that the organization was doing, but I was like, oh, how much of that are they paying for the org? How much are they paying for me? And it's both. Don't get me wrong, right? Like, the org provided a lot that I am trying to figure out, right? So I think that's a real question. I think, that's one that I think I had a sense of yes on this, just because I had sort of been talking to people over the course of the previous year, of like contractors themselves, and going to conferences and thinking about, and asking people, would you want it? So I wasn't totally cold going in, but yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question, right? And I think, to me, that felt like the big gamble was, will there be enough people who are willing to pay enough money for me to do this? I mean, I think I had always, it's weird because I'd always thought it was a direction I would go, but I just thought that it was going to be my way into retirement. And I was like, at that point, I don't really care if I get one or two projects, because it's just like a thing to do. But now it came earlier, and yeah, it's
Yeah. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but really, what is retirement? If you like, once you leave the full-time world, you start to ask these questions of like, wait, I was like big into FIRE, financially independent, retire early, as a person who was working a full-time job that they didn't really like. But as soon as I started working more in this way of being a fractional, executive, I basically was like, I don't want that. I don't need to be financially independent. Actually, I would like to not worry about money, but I'm fine with not having so much money saved up that I never have to work again. I don't need that, right? And also, retiring early doesn't sound good. I would like to continue working on cool stuff, and like having people pay you to work on cool stuff is like validation and makes it more interesting than like just doing your own little thing, your own side project of learning about stuff. And so this idea of FIRE like really lost its allure, and even made me question, okay, yeah, what does retirement even mean in this context? And I felt like more like my parents, who are 70, 75, gonna work forever, probably. They're psychologists. They've always worked for themselves, right? And they have no interest in retiring. They just scale down, take vacations when they want to. Yeah.
It's really a trade-off. Sorry, because you're hitting on a lot of things here. It's really a trade-off of, how much time do you have? How much do you spend doing things that aren't related to work? And then what do you need to get paid for the time that is spent on work, right? So as you guys think about that, do you have like a hurdle in your head that's like, in order for me to do this, I need to be able to like cover this nut. I need to cover like my fixed
Yes.
expenses plus, like, is that how you think about it? Because that's
Yes.
how I think about it. And it drives me crazy, because I'm kind of like, I don't know if I can hit that number or how long it'll take me to hit that number. And if I'm hitting that number by allocating the time to work, I'm not spending the time trying to find the full-time job.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's like what made me comfortable was first having set like enough money saved up that I wasn't worried. I knew that I could kind of get through those first 6 months that Vikash was talking about earlier, right? And it was it needed to be more than 6 months. It needed to be like more like 12 to 18 months saved up, right? Not of what I would ideally spend, but 12 to 18 months of what I need to spend in order to, right? In order to like not make major sacrifices. So like that doesn't have to include fancy trips or anything like that, right? But like my rent, because I have kids, and my kids' private school, right? Those are like must spend money, right? For me. And everyone has a different definition of that. But having more than 6 months, I think, is necessary to give yourself the freedom to be committed enough for long enough that you can get over that hump that Vikash was talking about. And so once you have that, then I was like, okay, yeah, now I feel like I have this sense of freedom that now I just have to hit that hurdle. And I have to hit that hurdle, and there's like another hurdle in the future, which is what I was making before, which is more than what I need to make in order to make this sustainable, right? So I'm not eating into my savings. And so then make it sustainable. And once you make it sustainable, then you go for your past salary. And then once you get your past salary, then you go for twice your past salary or whatever, right? And at that point, you're doing great. Like, right, that you have more flexibility, but and not everyone gets there. And the reason why they don't all get there is a multitude of things, right? It can be that you don't understand your niche, you weren't confident enough, you don't have a good enough network, but like most of the reason why people don't go for it is not those things, right? It's that they don't even give themselves a chance. It's that they don't even save up enough to make themselves comfortable to do this is one, or they do save up enough, but they're still too scared to do it, right? That's many of this. 3, they don't even know what it is, right? And they just like work a miserable full-time job. They hate it. And they just don't look into anything else. They just kind of live their life on autopilot, right? That's a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you definitely hit a thing for me here on sort of, okay, so I have at this stage, like, I have commitments for like several $1,000s, but I've had a check for like this much. I am like already receivables are way behind, whatever. And that's behind, like, if I'm trying to make, I mentioned earlier I have a goal for the year that is essentially like my salary, the fringe benefits, and my travel budget, right? And so if I want to make that over the course of 12 months, well, I should have X thousand in the bank already, and I don't. And so like I totally hear you on the oh my God, I'm chasing and am I putting enough time into. I think to me, I'm like, all right, look, there are these conversations that are going to yield in Q3 and Q4, and I don't want to overcommit to things that I don't want to do, to Sean's earlier point, because I want to make sure I have time in the second half of the year to do what I do want to do. And then another thing that's been just really helpful to me, so something that Sean and I have bonded over after college, is running and race mentalities, right? And I think when I set like a goal for a race, I usually have 3 goals. I have kind of that real reach goal that is like, that's the one that is shooting the moon. Then I have like the realistic goal that I think I can hit, that is like more sort of in target. Maybe it's a push, but it's more realistic. And then I got the one where I'm like, I really have to at least get myself over the line in that amount of time, right? And so I think about that similarly now, of like my goal for the year, like goal C here is like, just what do I need to pay my rent, eat my ramen, and like, make sure that I'm wearing shoes that don't have holes in it. Goal B is like my last year's salary, the fringe, and the travel. And goal C is like, whatever, it's a reach, but I think I can get there, right? So I think that's helpful too, of like, all right, look, I'm not shooting the moon, but I am paying my rent, and like I'm protecting the time. And then compare that to, right, the time that, because this book proposal that I'm working on is very unfunded, but I do want to make sure I have time to do it, right? And so I think that's just, you've got to try to protect that and do that, but it's all trade-offs, and it's hard.
Different hard, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, but I love it, right? Like, I would say there are, yeah, it's stressful, and I'm meeting with accountants more than I used to. I never did before. Someone else dealt with that. But like, I love it. I feel great. It is what I want to do. I think the stuff I'm doing with my clients, stuff that I want to do and that I've selected. And so, it's I'm happy with my decisions.
Nice. All right. So let's bring it home. We've got 2 minutes. I feel like the best way is to end with kind of like a commitment. So if you think that this is something that could be a good path for you, then what's one action that you can take this week in order to kind of like move through this? And I'll give you a few suggestions, and then feel free to use one of those and put it in the chat, or something else as well. So a few suggestions would be, you can reach out to 3 people in your network to explore opportunities. Another idea is that you can update your LinkedIn profile to reflect more like the skill set that you have, right? You don't have to like call yourself a fractional worker or anything, but you can update it so that it's like accurate based on what you actually do, keeping in mind that of you kind of as a business, as instead of you as a full-time employee. And the third is that you could work on in identifying what your niche could be, and how you would be able to package that with clients. So feel free to choose one of those or identify something else that you could do if you want to move towards this. And then as you guys do that, Lorenzo asked a question. I missed the beginning. Is there a link to the recording? We did record it. There will be. So I'll work with Ben to share that out with everyone.
And just Anisha put something in the chat about holding boundaries, which I think is important, right? Know what you do, but also like don't be afraid to explore a little bit, right? You have a chance to maybe dabble a little bit, right? Again, stay true to your mission because that's where most of your money will come from, but be bold.
And then so we'll wrap there. I just pasted my LinkedIn here. Vikash, you can do the same. Would love to connect with you all if you want to continue the conversation. Happy to chat with people one-on-one, either through DMs or setting up more time. And yeah, that's about it for today. Thank you so much for joining, and best of luck to you all in your potential move towards fractional work. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Yarek. Love the hearts. Bye.